Happy 2023. It's the 1st of January. I hope you had a good start into the new year. And I'm also sure you've always asked yourself, how did Shakespeare celebrate New Year? Well, the actual question we should ask is, did he celebrate New Year at all? The short answer is no. The long answer is kind of. So if you want to know how Shakespeare and contemporaries celebrated the New Year and Christmas, what customs they had, what food they ate, what dances they danced, this video is for you. So let's get right into it.
Hi everyone, it's Dr. Flo from My Year with Shakespeare, your expert in all things blood, bodices, daggers and drama. Now, 2023 is a super important year for Shakespeare studies because 400 years ago, the most important book in Shakespeare studies and perhaps English literature came out. It's this year, Master William Shakespeare's Histories, Comedies and Tragedies. I will be reading one poem or one play a week and I'll invite you to join me. If you want to hear more about that, click on this link here. So what does Christmas and New Year's actually mean for Shakespeare? In the Renaissance, it was the longest holiday and the most celebrated one, and it was completely different from what we do today. So no Christmas trees, no little balls and shiny things and plastic things at all. What we do today would seem absolutely bizarre and absurd for Shakespeare. It wasn't a solemn holiday at all. It was crazy, it was fun, people were not working, people were really going a little bit mad. Most of all, it was a much longer season, so it went on from the 25th of December to the 12th of January. That's the minimum days, the 12 days of Christmas. But actually the season, the festive season, started much earlier and went on much longer. So it could start sometimes on the 11th of November, that's Martinmas, the feast of St. Martin, and it could potentially go on until the 2nd of February. That's the feast of the purification of Mary. People would keep their decorations up, there would still be merrymaking, so really from late autumn to late winter, people would just be celebrating. So if you can buy Christmas things in during the Halloween season, and if you keep your Christmas tree and if you keep your skeletons and pumpkins up for much longer than the actual days, you have the stamp of approval of Shakespeare. So this was a super important holiday for workers because you must imagine that they were working 6 days a week, lots of long hours, really hard labor, and this was a holiday for them. All work stopped except for animal husbandry, and people were able to relax, make merry, just have fun. They put, for example, flowers on spinning wheels to symbolize that they were not working. Everything came to a halt. Even the Queen Elizabeth I, would send her courtiers back to their country homes to make sure that they were providing for tenants, they were providing food, and people were not working. Shakespeare is super attuned to how it feels like to be really cold and then to make merry inside. So I just want to read you a little song from Love's Labour's Lost. When icicles hang by the wall, and Dick the shepherd blows his nail, and Tom bears logs into the hall, and milk comes frozen home and pale, when blood is nipped and ways be foul, then nightly sings the staring owl, to wit to woo, a merry note while greasy Joan doth keel the pot. When all allow the wind doth blow, and coughing drowns the parson's law, and birds sit brooding in the snow, and Marian's nose looks red and raw, when roasted crabs hiss in the bowl, then nightly sings the staring owl, to wit to woo. So Shakespeare really gets what it's like being super cold in winter, and hence it's all the better, all the nicer to be inside, huddle close to the fire, dance and sing and have fun. So what were the preparations that people had to get ready for this festive season? Well, they would decorate their homes. And here's a little excerpt from Stowe's Survey of London. That's an early 17th century kind of reflections on the culture of London and what it's like to live in London. He says, against the feasts of Christmas, every man's house, as also their parish churches, were decked with holm, ivy, bays, and whatsoever the season of the year afforded to be green. The conduits and the standards in the streets were likewise garnished. So people would bring evergreens, such as, for example, this holly from my neighbor and this vase from my own garden and the ivy that you see behind me. They would bring that home and decorate their homes with evergreens. There would be a Yule log as well, so they would go into the forest, drag a huge log inside their home, put it on the hearth, and decorate that with ribbons and keep it burning for the whole 12 days of Christmas. This Yule log tradition and also the decorations and the merrymaking are sort of pagan relics from bygone times. We'll talk about that a little bit later in this video. There'd also be kissing boughs, so they would take ash, hazel, willow, ivy and make a really big bough under which they would kiss. This is, of course, the mistletoe that we put up today. You know, we put a little mistletoe. They had these long, big boughs that they were creating. So Christmas and New Year's was really a time where the green from the outside, the life and the kind of nature that still was around even in the depth of winter and in the darkness of the winter solstice on the 21st of December, that will be brought home. So the kind of solemnities that we have now with our candles and our lights, you know, twinkling lights, no, that's not at all Renaissance. It was a festivity of nature, of green, and of a kind of promise that nature will return. So let's look in a little bit more detail how people would actually spend those festive days. On the 25th of December, Christmas morning, people would go to church. That's of course mandatory back in the days. Then they would come back, have breakfast and start cooking and getting everything ready for the supper in the evening, so the first sort of Christmas dinner. Food played a hugely important part in those festivities for Christmas and New Year this entire season. And that was both for rich and poor. So usually you would see a huge difference in people's lives depending on their social class and income or like wealth. But during that time, really everybody made sure to have an abundance of food at home and to be able to provide for themselves, their family, their households, their neighbors. So summer and autumn would really be a time where people gathered and collected and got food ready for the banqueting season, Christmas and New Year. And we have lots of records of household books where people were really detailing what kind of things they were eating and how they were getting ready. There are books on proper having a household and how to do that, how to prepare for the Christmas and New Year's season. Entertaining guests was super important. So if you were remotely capable of providing for guests, you would have people over. There is a record of Sir William Ingatstone of Essex, who had 100 guests for a feast on the 6th of January in 1552. And it says in this record that they consumed meat pies, 15 joints of beef, 4 of veal, 3 of pork, including a whole suckling pig, 3 geese, a brace each of partridge, teal, capons and conies, a woodcock, a 12 larks, with a whole sheep, and numerous dishes of salads, vegetables, and desserts. So you see really how important food and abundance was in this dark time and how people were really preparing in summer and autumn for this one moment in the year. So it was really all about the food. You had sweetmeats, for example, that's Elizabethan sweets, sort of like cookies and stuff, and then minced pies, which actually contained minced meat. So that would be chicken, hare, duck, and also lots of spices. And that was a reminder, or it's kind of interesting to think about it, that the almonds and the sugars and the spices that were in these sweetmeats and minced pies came from the Orient. So in the Middle Ages, during the Crusades, Europeans, Christians had contact with Muslims in Palestine they were fighting against, but they also brought lots of stuff back. And those minced pies, the way that they were back then, are kind of a reminder of that. They're savory, they were rich and had dried fruits and lemon peel and spices and alcohol and meat. They're not really like the ones we have today. And even during the Victorians and Edwardians, so even until kind of 100 years ago, people would still have those original minced pies. And now, of course, we don't have meat in them anymore, and they've become sweet. Now, we have actually mince pies recipes from back in the days. For example, the one by Lady Eleanor Fetty Place, wife of Sir Richard of Appleton Manor. She was very proud of that. She was a contemporary of Shakespeare's, and she has a book of recipes. It's sort of a manuscript book that she passes down from generation to generation. She writes her name on it and is very proud that she's a wife of a Sir. And she lets us know how households and kind of country houses and how those houses would be managed and what kind of recipes there would be and what people would be doing. So I'm just going to read you a mince pie recipe of Lady Eleanor.
Parboil your mutton, then take as much suet as meat, and mince it both small. Then put mace and nutmegs, and cinnamon, and sugar, and orange peels, and currants, and great raisins, and a little rosewater. Put all these to the meat. Beat your spices and orange peel very small, and mingle your fruit and spice and all together with the meat, and so bake it. Put as much currants as meat and twice as much sugar as salt. Put some ginger into it. Let the suet be beef suet, for it is better than mutton suet.
So what else would people do except eating and cooking? There would be wassailing. That's a hugely important part of Renaissance Christmas tradition, and it comes from Old English res hail, be well, or being in good health. And wassail is a punch made from hot ale, sugar, spices and apples that you can even do still today because we have recipes, and people would go around and pass the wassail from door to door for each neighbour. There would be song and dance. People would sing carols. Carols are songs that are with dance. It's not just a song like it is today, a Christmas song, but it's a song with a dance. There were printed collections of those songs that were hugely popular throughout the Renaissance period, although they did disappear during the Puritan reign in the middle of the 17th century, and they really disappeared until the Victorians, who kind of revived that. Some of those songs we still have today, and we still sing. So this was a time of drinking and eating and merrymaking. So there would be juggling, tumbling, street spectacles, spectacles in the halls, gambling, dice, card games, other games like Hoodman's Blind, which is an ancestor of Blind Man's Buff. There would be theatre, so mummery, travelling players going from household to household, village to village. And this is of course where we can see Shakespeare becoming maybe interested or participating in theatre plays. And in theatre and drama, you also play another person or another character or another thing. So you are not yourself. And this kind of changing places was key for the time, for the festive season, which was all about becoming a little bit crazy and changing places. It was all about like a topsy-turvy world. So servants would become masters and masters' servants. And they had a lord of misrule, so they would choose one person out of their ranks to kind of preside over the and to organize the games, to organize the dancing and the merriment. And in church cathedrals, you would have one of the boys being elected by his peers to become a bishop and to lead the services. So you really have the lowest creature in society, a boy, as it were, a child, to dress up in bishop's robes and to conduct church service. That happened in lots of cathedrals like York or Canterbury, and it was also discontinued after the Reformation. And we'll talk about the role of the Reformation a little bit later in the video. What's important for now is to realize it was really a time where the rules changed, the traditions changed, the social class kind of became much more murky and even reversed. So this craziness, of course, and this change of roles sits very closely with theatre and with playing and what it means to slip into another person or another social rank that is not actually your own. So what do people do on the actual specific dates. On New Year's Day, it was just another kind of day of Christmas. It was the 8th day of Christmas, because the new year didn't begin on the 31st of December, it began on the 25th of May. It's Lady Day, because calendar-wise, the British still use the Julian calendar and only changed to the Gregorian calendar that we have today in 1752. So no fireworks on New Year's Day. People were exchanging gifts rather. They were, for example, putting clothes in an orange, or had little jewellery, or were giving each other gifts. Of course, there's a sliding scale in terms of social class and wealth in terms of gift giving. So the Queen, for example, would celebrate New Year's Day, the gift giving session with her courtiers, and would hand them over a gift and also be receiving a gift. And this symbolic act was really important to sort of cement the bonds between the monarch and her courtiers. And Elizabeth would also have somebody record who gave her what and what was the value of this. For example, a little brooch in the shape of a ship, or what was the value, who gave it to her. So she was very particular, and she really wanted to know how much worth was she to her courtiers. It didn't mean that she would be keeping those gifts. She would just sort of pass them on another occasion, or the next New Year's Day the next year. But this kind of act of gift giving was important, and this is what people would be doing on New Year's Day. Now, 12th night, the 6th of January, that is when the Lord of Misrule steps down. That's officially the end of the Christmas period, and we have to get back to work. We have to get back to the social organization the way it usually is. The 6th of January is the Feast of the Epiphany, and it commemorates the arrival of the 3 wise men in Bethlehem. And people would bake a cake, a spicy fruit cake, and they would put a pea and a bean in there for a king and queen of these revels of the last day of Christmas, as it were. Sometimes there would also be Plough Monday. That's especially in the countryside, where people would just keep on celebrating a little bit and celebrate the return to the field after this long period of rest. There'd be dancing, masquerades, physical competitions. Ploughboys would be driving a plough through the village, decorating that and gathering alms for the parish.
So the roots of the celebrations are very firmly pagan. It's all about nature, it's all about merrymaking. So what does that mean? It means that they center around the winter solstice on the 21st of December. That's the longest night of the year. And in the 4th century, Pope Julius I placed the nativity on the 25th of December around the solstice time in order to help the spread of Christianity, for it to be accepted by pagans across Europe, because there's actually no set date for the nativity anywhere. Sometimes it would be celebrated in September, and sometimes as late as February, before the 4th century. So you have the pagan festivities of Yule and the winter solstice, and then you have also in ancient Rome a holiday season called Saturnalia, also at the end of December, where masters would slay the servants and slaves become the masters, very similar to the Lord of Misrule. So those two kinds of things, the Saturnalia of ancient Rome and then the pagan Yule winter solstice holidays, would sort of coincide. And it makes a lot of sense, because after the 21st of December the nights become shorter and the days longer, so it's the return of light and it's the return of nature, although it's also the first day of winter. So Pope Julius I decided to make those things coincide in a very shrewd decision in order to be accepted by people, for Christianity to be accepted. So those traditions just carried over for hundreds of years. And we still sort of have that when we have our Christmas tree inside. It's not a Shakespearean tradition, but it's still bringing something green, an evergreen tree from the outside inside. Now, what was the impact of the Reformation on this sort of pagan-inspired holiday season? It's unfortunately true that Protestants did cancel Christmas.
Not yet, not in Shakespeare's lifetime, because the Church of England was still relatively high church. That means it was relatively ritualistic. So those Christmas customs, those New Year holiday customs were kept, and Shakespeare and his family certainly were celebrating them in a kind of traditional way, with merrymaking, fun, drinks, theatre, and all of that. Puritans for decades lobbied to kind of ban Christmas and ban the merrymaking, and Charles I in the 17th century grants them a request to make Christmas more subdued. It becomes more solemn, it becomes a time of fasting, reflections, and not this boisterous holiday that it's been for so long. In 1645, Parliament lobbied to have no religious revelry, so it's really just a holiday for reflection, for kind of piousness. 10 years later, Parliament managed to have the shops being open during Christmas, so it's not a holiday anymore. There's no kind of standstill. And it really took the restoration of the monarchy in 1660 for Christmas to come back. Christmas and New Year's in Shakespeare is conspicuously absent. Does that mean he was Puritan? Definitely not. But he never wrote a play for Christmas or for New Year's. Although, of course, he wrote Twelfth Night, but that wasn't really because it was about Twelfth Night or Christmas, but it was played on Twelfth Night for the king, because at some point Shakespeare became part of the King's Men. That's a play troupe patronized by the king, so they would come to the king and play for the king when there was an occasion, such as the Christmas and the New Year's festivities. And we have records of Shakespeare playing for Charles I, but also for Queen Elizabeth in the different kinds of courts, Hampton Court, Greenwich, for example. They play Twelfth Night, Midsummer Night's Dream, King Lear. It really wasn't a question of an occasion and then writing a play with the theme of that occasion. It was just because Christmas and New Year was a time for merrymaking. Now, inside of Shakespeare's plays, there are some suggestions of Christmas and some kind of records of Christmas. So one would, for example, be Hamlet. In the first act, Marcellus at the very beginning says it's the time of Christmas, where the first scene is set, as it were. And in Twelfth Night, we have the kind of a Lord of Misrule that could be Sir Toby. It's about disguises and a woman dressing up as a man, and about social stations becoming kind of blurred, or the ranks between servants and masters becoming blurred, for sure. So we have that theme in Twelfth Night, or in lots of other plays by Shakespeare. One could say that the romances, like The Winter's Tale, for example, deal with themes of Christmas and New Year, such as families, redemption, nature, cycles, the cycle of nature, light returning. But again, there's no kind of actual engagement with Christmas or with New Year, and there's certainly no play that takes all of those festivities that in a way would lend themselves for a play in the whole of the Shakespeare repertoire.
There are actually only 3 instances in which Shakespeare mentions some kind of end-of-year festivities, and that is Love's Labour's Lost twice and The Taming of the Shrew. In Love's Labour's Lost, the courtiers and the king discuss about what they want to do, at least what the king wants them to do. He wants them to just study and not flirt and not meet any women. And one of the courtiers, Baron, says, well, the time for study is over. We are not young boys anymore. So he says, at Christmas, I no more desire a rose than wish a snow in May's new-fangled mirth. By which he means, well, I don't really expect to do something that I do in my youth, when I'm actually already middle-aged at the end of the year, not really at the end of his life, but more middle-aged. So that's what the first quotation refers to. The second one is also in Love Labour's Lost, and that's at the end of the play. So the courtiers, after a lot of to and fro with their female counterparts that they of course actually do meet, even though they've just wanted to focus on their studies, the women play a trick on them, and here is what they say. I see the trick on't. Here was a consent, knowing aforehand of our merriment, to dash it like a Christmas comedy. So they were dressing up, wanting to kind of fool the women, but the women knew about that beforehand. So they dashed it like a Christmas comedy. And this is very interesting because it brings the festivity of Christmas together with a comedy, with playing. And this is, of course, what Shakespeare would have seen and would have experienced live. So the festive season was a season of drama and of theatre and of merrymaking and being someone else than you usually are. The third quotation is from The Taming of the Shrew, and it's Sly the Tinker, who is the main character of the induction. So that is the play before the play. Quite exactly what that means we will discuss when we come to The Taming of the Shrew in my year with Shakespeare. So a character called Sly says, "Let them play it." So the players have come and they play the play within the play, as it were. "Is not a comedy a Christmas gambled or tumbling trick?" And the page says, "No, my lord, it is more pleasing stuff." A comedy or comonti, I really don't know quite how they would have pronounced that. That is a way of saying comedy. Of course, we also hear the word commodity, so that sort of relates to the economy of playing and of the trade of drama. But he says, is it a comedy or a Christmas gamble or tumbling trick? And all of this refers to the merrymaking and the amusements and the entertainments of Christmas.
So Shakespeare doesn't really engage with Christmas and New Year's in terms of the festivities. What did it mean for him and for people in the Renaissance? Well, it was kind of more about values and about being together. There's a poem by Thomas Tusser from 1557 that really beautifully describes the values or the feeling of the time, and it goes like this. "At Christmas we banquet, the rich with the poor. Who then but the miser but openeth the door?" So Christmas and New Year was a time of being together with your friends, with your family, with your neighbors, with your parish, with your household, with the people, if you were a nobleman or had a country house and an estate, with the people, with your tenants. So it was a time of resting, of not working, of feasting, of being together with values like generosity or kindness. Hospitality was super important. Loosening the distinctions between people, visiting neighbors, sharing food. So I hope that you were able to experience some of those traditions and those feelings that Shakespeare and his contemporaries experienced during this time in the Renaissance. I hope you had a good Christmas and a great start to the new year. If you are interested in my year with Shakespeare and in joining me, have a look at the description box below, and I'll see you again soon.